Hello, Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett. It's Wednesday. That means, as it has for what, 10 years?
Eight years.
8 years.
We're in our 9th year right now.
9th year. And you're still so young. How do you do it?
Oh, yeah. Look, check out this gray beard on
Check
that
out
young
the gray
guy.
beard. You've had the beard. You haven't had the beard.
I don't know how long it's going to last. I'm getting tired of it.
I've never had the beard.
I'm getting tired of it.
But in any event, I think we're going to have a really good show for folks tonight. It's a topic of top priority for us here in Manchester and in New Hampshire. And we got I think, one of the best possible guests to discuss it. Former Manchester Police Chief Dave Mera, former Portsmouth Police Chief Dave Mera, attorney at law Dave Mera, and now he's what's commonly referred to as the New Hampshire drug czar. The official title, if I've got it right, is the Governor's Advisor on Addiction and Behavioral Health.
That's it.
Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
But a lot of people are just going to shorten that to drug czar. And we're gonna talk about this public health crisis we have in the state and in our city that we've talked about a lot, but we have a really guest with I think is going to bring us a really good perspective on this, a law enforcement perspective, but now with his current position, a much broader perspective on it too. And something where all of us love our quality of life in New Hampshire. We know we rank very high and low unemployment, high individual wealth on sort of the median, but good educational rankings. But we have this scourge, and
we rank high in opioid use.
And we rank high in opioid use. But in any event, one of the features I'm really enjoying that Mike has brought to this program since last year about this time,
just about,
is the POTUS report on the progress report, and he has something for us today.
We'll go really quick. Recently, President Trump tweeted that his favorability rating among black voters had doubled, and it was reported in the news that was absolutely not true. And what they reported was that as recently as December, his favorability rating among black voters was sitting around 15%, and the most recent polling had him sitting at 6%. But I saw one article that I really appreciated. They zeroed in on it. The week prior to the 6% rating, he had polled at 3% among black voters. So his favorability for that week over week had actually doubled at the moment the tweet was sent. So we've been knocking him for not telling the truth. We got to give credit where credit is due. So yes, his favorability has doubled to 6%.
I thought you were going to say it went from 2 individuals to 4. That would be doubling too, wouldn't it?
Thanks to some good reporting to get that right, because he's told thousands of lies. I think something like 2,000. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's been various counts, but
people are counting. Yeah.
But that one, I think he might have been onto something.
Yeah, I was distressed to learn, but not surprised, that Martin Luther King Day, most of our living ex-presidents have taken the occasion of that day to provide some community service somewhere.
And it really has taken on that ethos within the community, too.
Yeah. But for Mr. Trump, it was a day at golf at Mar-a-Lago. So there you go.
To each his own. I'm not going to criticize a guy for golfing, although he would criticize a guy for golfing.
Yeah.
We've seen it.
All right. We're off that now.
Yes. A much more important topic.
Much more important
And let's remind folks, they can call in if they have any experience in this or would like to offer any insight. 640-3091 is our number.
Yes.
We really love the callers.
Please join us if you want to talk about this topic. We'll probably let you even talk about another topic, but I hope you'll have some input on this as we turn it over to Chief Mera. And thank you for coming down and joining us. I know you work long days, and it's a real pleasure to have you down here.
It's been a while since I've been on here.
Yeah. I know you're an attorney, and you were a city prosecutor, you were a city police chief, Portsmouth police chief, and now you've got this job working with the governor on addiction and behavioral health. Anything else you'd like to tell us about your background? Because you have a lot of friends here in Manchester and a long and distinguished career of service to the city of Manchester.
I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, and I spent the vast majority of those years in Manchester. I treasure my time in Manchester. I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to be a Manchester police officer, and then ultimately have the honor of becoming, and the responsibility of becoming the chief of police.
What level did you start at in the police department?
Patrolman.
You worked your way all up to chief, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, very good. Okay, how long have you been in the position with the governor on this, well, I'll just shorten it up and say drug czar capacity?
Since July.
Since July.
Can you tell us a little bit about the office? Do you actually have an office in the State House or in the State Office Park, or kind of, are you self-contained? Tell us a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the position.
I work out of the governor's office. My office is in the State House Annex on the second floor. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, or I can't say most of the time, a lot of the time, I'm out on the road. Going across the state, trying to learn what is being done, what people are doing, and coming up and listening to people's ideas and listening to people talk about how this issue has affected them.
Yeah. What can you actually do in this position? I assume you, as the title suggests, you would advise our governor about what to do, but what more can you do? Can you, what are the things that you can do in your capacity other than to learn a lot about this, and there's always more to learn, but other than that, how can you help people on the front lines dealing with this crisis?
Well, one of the things that I do is I will visit different programs throughout the state. Mm-hmm. Talk to not only the people that work there, but also if I get the opportunity, to people that are getting treatment or are there for recovery or whatever the circumstances. I also try to find what programs are working, what is the most, what do we get the biggest bang for our buck on. Mm-hmm. And then I report back to the governor. I also try to learn about what is going on nationwide, what are best practices, what is working other places, seeing if we can bring some of that to New Hampshire. And I also feel that my job, a big part of my job, is to do what I'm doing now, talk, educate the public about this is a problem that's going on. The more that people know about it, the more better informed they are, the better they can stop somebody in their family or a friend from perhaps going down a road of trying a drug or alcohol or anything that is not that is addictive.
You know, we start off this report, you were here with our POTUS report, and one of the things some time ago the president described New Hampshire as a drug-infested den.
I'm glad you asked that. I wanted to ask that.
A drug-infested den, and I was outraged. But on the other hand, we know that New Hampshire, although as we were talking earlier, New Hampshire leads in so many statistics we're proud of: low unemployment, educated population, excellent schools, many things. But here we are, a leader in something we're not proud of. And I just don't understand why that is. I mean, in some rankings in terms of number of overdoses that have to be reversed with Narcan or in actual deaths, we're close to the top and sometimes even at the top with, in this bad category. Why is that?
Well, if you go back to before those comments were made, there was a lot of media reports about New Hampshire. We have a population of approximately, 1.35 million? Mm-hmm. And proportionately, compared to the rest of the country, the other 50 states, we have the second most, proportionate to our population, the second most overdose deaths.
There it is.
If you look at why is that, I think it could be, I think you have to go back to the start of how this whole epidemic started, how this whole problem started with opioids, where years ago, where the pharmaceutical companies were marketing opioids, oxycodone, and they were saying that it does not have addictive qualities. Then they were encouraging and marketing and encouraging the medical profession to prescribe, opioids for pain. And then if you couple that with what had started to be a prevailing view in the medical community to treat pain as a vital sign, as opposed to pain as something that happens and that you control it, but you don't have to totally eliminate it.
Right.
So a combination of those two things,
Yeah.
and that's where we started getting a lot of people started taking opioids.
Yeah.
And we've heard stories, and it is true, you've heard stories, many stories about how people have gone for medical procedures. They get a knee operation, a back operation. They were prescribed opioids, and then the injured area of their body heals, but by that time they're
They're
addicted.
hooked. They're hooked.
And there really wasn't any information, or they weren't provided with any information where they weren't weaned off the pain medication during the whole time that they were under doctor's care. So if you look at that, and I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of things come up to my mind. First of all, I'm just absolutely shocked that the pharmaceutical companies that are producing these drugs, particularly the ones you mentioned, OxyContin, oxycodone, which are wonderful pain palliatives, how could they not know that these drugs were addictive? How could their people that are recommending doctors to prescribe these drugs not be told that these, I mean, I don't understand that.
Well, the way they marketed it, they used there was a letter written about opioids. It was in a burn unit, and they were talking about treating the patients in that particular medical facility that did not seem to be that they were becoming addicted. They took that out of context, and they marketed it as a study, and they said that that shows that it was quoted hundreds of times, and it showed that they claimed it showed that it didn't have addictive qualities.
Wow.
You know, Bob, and I got to say, without any disrespect at all, does it surprise you for 1 minute that a multi-billion-dollar industry would oversell itself? Did it surprise you when the tobacco companies said that they didn't cause cancer?
Well,
for how many years did they do that? It doesn't shock me at all. But you got this guy Shkreli who's, profiteering off of, medical devices. That's a real. We could put on weeks worth of shows on that industry.
Well, we could, but it really does surprise me. It just does. I mean, I think these companies, they're making plenty of money. There's no doubt about it. And drug prices in this country are way above the rest of the world. But it still shocks me that they would produce this drug in which they should know its properties. I mean, and not disclose to the doctors they're marketing to the downside of these things.
But they had that one report that they could hang their hat on.
Yeah, there you are. And the other thing the other question that comes up for me, Chief, is this couldn't have been just New Hampshire and a few other states that were subject to this misinformation from the drug companies or lack of accurate information. So again, it comes back, why New Hampshire? Why are we at the top of the list? Because these drug companies certainly made the same marketing efforts in other states.
Well, we can use Manchester as an example,
Let's
and
do.
I think it would explain why New Hampshire is second proportionately to their population to the rest of the states in opioid-related deaths, overdose deaths. When I was chief, we started seeing in about late 2012, 2013. We started seeing some property crimes increase, and in particular, we started seeing in 2013, I believe in July. We saw our reported burglaries just jump significantly at Manchester Police. We were very data-driven, trying to be as efficient as we can to use our resources the most efficient way, and that's still the fact over there. That's still the case. So we started digging in. Why all of a sudden are we seeing, I believe we had about 200 burglaries, like 190-something for a month in July, which was incredible. So started digging in, and we started finding that it was people that were had addiction issues, and at that time it was almost predominantly pills. So we found what we were finding is that people might try pills, start taking them, get addicted, and now they need them. And we're also seeing people again that were treated and got legal prescriptions. Then when those prescriptions ran out, they now needed to. It's an insidious addiction. They needed to keep on feeding as they call it, the dragon. They had to chasing the dragon. They needed to keep on getting high. And a lot of as that addiction progresses, a lot of people, it stops being a case of, hey, I'm taking drugs to get high. It becomes, I'm taking drugs to stop from becoming sick. So what happens is people, they found that it was very expensive out in the street. Rule of thumb, it was about $1 a milligram to buy a pill out in the street. So pills come in 30 all different kinds of milligrams. But so if they're taking several pills a day, that got to be pretty expensive. Mm-hmm. So what happened is they resorted to crimes to try to be able to convert property into money so they can then go in.
So they weren't breaking in to steal someone else's pills. They were stealing TV sets to pawn them or fence them.
Also, they it wasn't uncommon for people to break into a house and to they of course go to the medicine cabinet as well. Mm-hmm. But elderly people, there were cases of elderly people and still are being preyed upon, checking out their medicine cabinet. And that's a whole nother subject, how very important it is to dispose of drugs. We could talk about that and there is being a lot of progress made there. But so what happens is Mexico, the Mexican drug cartels, and it seems far-fetched. Here we are way up in Manchester, New Hampshire, talking about Mexico, and there's a snowstorm going on outside at this time. But there's a direct nexus between Mexico and illicit drugs that come into New Hampshire. So 2014, it almost turned almost all to heroin that we were finding. In the amount of pills that we were confiscating went down. And that
was strictly a cost factor, right? It's just much, much cheaper to get your high that way than to try and chase down OxyContin.
It was a lot cheaper, and again, the Mexicans saw a void that they could fill, not only in New Hampshire, but all through New England and other parts of the United States. So what happens is 2014, cheap heroin. You could, I've heard people, kids talk about, hey, it's easy for me to buy heroin than to go buy alcohol. So that
surprises me.
The state was flooded with it, and people started reverting to heroin. And then by 2015, by the time I left Manchester in July, we're seeing it was almost all fentanyl. And again, the vast majority of that was coming from Mexico. And fentanyl
and today, most of the overdoses, and I guess even more, most of the deadly overdoses are fentanyl more than heroin. Is that right?
And that is what that's why I was telling that story, leading up to it. That is why New Hampshire, I believe, one of the factors is that fentanyl is readily available, it's cheap, and there's a lot of it out there. So that is why we're seeing in New Hampshire, a lot of Manchester and New Hampshire, proportionate to our size, more overdoses than the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. It has to do with fentanyl. People don't know what they're injecting. I've heard talk with John Delana and other people in the DEA. John is in charge of DEA in New Hampshire. And I've heard him talk about this many times about how when fentanyl comes from Mexico, it goes to Lawrence. Now they're going to cut it with something. So say it costs $8,000 to buy a kilo of fentanyl in Mexico. You bring it up to Lawrence, Massachusetts. You cut it, and that $8,000 you can convert easily and sell to $10,000. The profit is incredible, to $8,000 to $10,000 a kilo. So what they do is they mix it with whatever they're cutting it with. Traditionally, it was a lactose-based powder that was easy to find and legal to buy. But now it's being mixed with other drugs. There's been instances of rat poison. You don't know what they're mixing into.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you. I think a consumer's really taking a chance on this street trade because there's no protection of any regulatory agency there or any law. I mean, how do you know what you're getting?
Well, it's the black market.
It's the black market.
And the way they mix it. So they use blenders. They'll mix the fentanyl with blenders, and it's typical, the most common way people buy heroin is by the fingers. It's 10 grams, and they call it fingers because it's a rectangle, and it resembles, about roughly the size of a finger. So what they do is they then pack it into these fingers, and then they sell it. So somebody might buy a finger, and maybe they're going to go up to bring it back to New Hampshire. They can buy it a lot cheaper in Lawrence, bring it up to New Hampshire. The farther north you go, the more that it becomes more expensive, the more profit you can make if you were to sell it. So what happens is they might split it with a bunch of people. One person might be getting a dose from the beginning where, hey, it might be all cut, or and somebody else might be getting a dose that it's too much fentanyl and they're dying. And they end up dying, and that is what's happening.
We're not using the pharmaceutical quality mixing techniques and measurement techniques.
No.
Yeah.
Well, we need to take our break.
We need to
regroup
take a break,
and-
folks, but to remind you, we have a outstanding guest to talk about probably the greatest public health problem we face in the city and the state right now, and that's the opioid crisis. And we have a person with great background, experience, and knowledge on this, so I hope you'll call in with some questions or comments, 640-3091, and we're going to take our break. We'll be right back to talk about where the solution lies, or what are the ways to a better future. Hi, folks. This is the progress report for this Wednesday in January, and month's a little more than half over, folks. For those of you who want winter to go by, we're getting there.
The days are getting longer.
The days are getting a little longer. The snow is still coming, though. But we are very pleased to have with us as our guest our former police chief, Dave Mera, former Portsmouth police chief, now serving in the governor's office as his advisor on addiction problems and behavioral health, sometimes called the drug czar, and he's now working on a problem that he dealt with as in the law enforcement capacity here in the city, both cities, I guess, and now has a much broader agenda to try and help our communities deal with this problem and turn back this tide. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, during the break, we were talking about one aspect of this, and before we went into the break, you talked about how the further north you get, the more valuable a finger of heroin / fentanyl is. You can get more for it. I mean, we're talking pure market economics here. And during the break, we discussed something that I guess we both had heard, and I'd like you maybe to comment on it. That among the people who are the consumers of this heroin that's coming in from Mexico through a pipeline right up 95, I guess, some of them are looking for the stronger product. So, if they hear that, there's been an overdose, they want to know where that particular victim may have gotten his heroin, because they feel that might be stronger stuff, and maybe they're smart enough to be able to handle it better. I don't know what the thinking is, but I guess if you could comment on that, is that really going on? And secondly, how do you combat a market where there is a consumer base?
Well, that is definitely has gone on, and I've heard anecdotally, from several law enforcement sources that does happen. And it all comes down to, I talked about how insidious the addiction is. And what I've been told by people that that are actively using fentanyl, heroin, in people in recovery, is that nothing compares to that first high that you get. Everybody's different. Not everybody gets addicted if they're a prescription.
Well, it must be incredible for people to take this risk. They got to know it's an awful risk with an unknown quality of the substance they're buying. I mean, it must be incredible.
But we have to look at it, and we have to look at it as addiction is a disease. What is happening is happening in the brain, and the uncontrollable urge to get that next dose. It's a disease that has to be treated. Until that disease is treated, this is what's going to happen. We can't look at it as being, hey, somebody just they made the choice. That might be that maybe they made the initial choice to try it, but at some point, based on the way people are made, they are more susceptible to becoming addicted.
So treating it as a character flaw is not the best
It's
approach.
just like you're treating, just like we want to treat somebody with diabetes. If we see them eating a cake or ice cream, we know they shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be treating somebody that's using heroin the same way, saying, hey, you got to stop doing that. But it is something that it is more cost-effective in the long run, better for everything from our healthcare costs, our economy, is to spend the money to get people treatment.
Yeah.
And if we jail people without getting them treatment, just to be in a county jail, roughly it costs about $30,000 a year to jail somebody. So it is more cost-effective to get treatment, and we have to make sure that treatment is available when people are ready to make that step. Most people that finally take that step to get treatment, like I said, those are the people that are no longer taking drugs to get high. They're taking drugs to stop from being sick. They want to get out of that spiraling cycle of addiction, and oftentimes they're not able to do so because the treatment isn't available.
You know, we had
So,
Chris Ritchie on the show several years
Yeah.
ago.
Hickey.
Yeah, Chris, my error. Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
And he had a very powerful slide presentation showing people, in business suits, business attire on their way to work, dead of an overdose because they didn't get the dose right, but they're trying to cope. And I'll never forget the line he said. She did not expect this when she left for work this morning.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is because he was so involved with getting safe stations up here in Manchester, and the whole point of that is catching people at the moment that they agree to come into treatment, not letting them change their mind. Can you talk a little bit about that, and the importance of that timing?
And the way that came about, where there was a firefighter who had a relative that was at, just like we were talking about, that person wanted treatment, didn't feel like living, and then the Chris Hickey, the firefighter, started talking about it. Well, and they said, well, bring him to the station, and they started making calls, and they were eventually able to at least get that person some help. So that's where my understanding, the whole idea of Safe Station came. The innovation, there was this big problem going on in Manchester, and then you have a group of firefighters saying, hey, what can we do about this? And it's, Chief Dan Goonan, he really embraced it. He's been to the White House twice. It's being nationally touted. Nashua used the same model. They've been very successful in their model. And it has worked. And it's
But-
just the type of thing where it just illustrates we need more treatment. People shouldn't have to go to a fire station.
Yeah.
There should be enough treatment and enough points of entry to get treatment.
Well, that's right. That's only a portal to what we need for treatment. And I was very concerned. You probably were too, Chief, to see that. One of our major. You go to the fire station. They take your vital signs. They stabilize you. If you need to have the Narcan to reverse a crisis, they do that. And then what? And one of the major places we've had in Manchester is Serenity Place, right? And now we hear that they're in a financial crisis. How are we doing? And what is your role in helping build up the opportunity? My understanding is this addiction gets its its fingernails into you. It's going to hold you for a while. You gotta have some time And you got to have a place to go,
Consistency.
and you got to have a consistent. Is that a place where we need more? I mean, I was very concerned to hear about the financial crisis at Serenity Place, for example.
Well, it's being, and right now, it's being addressed between the mayor, the fire department, the health department, providers, treatment providers, recovery, people involved in recovery services, you name it, United Way. There was a meeting that was held at the health department, and they were discussing on moving forward. I know that Families in Transition has taken over. They're an organization that has great skill and expertise of running a very successful nonprofit, and I'm confident that things are going to work out with that. The governor has acknowledged that this is a very important program that needs to continue. Because if you look at the numbers that are coming into safe stations in the fire stations that are coming into the fire stations in Manchester, there's a very large percentage of people that aren't from Manchester.
Yes.
People are coming here.
I'm glad you're bringing that up.
Well, they're coming here, they're desperate for help. And so safe stations, I believe that it is going to continue to be viable. There's some things that are being worked out. I think in the end, there's enough people and organizations in this city that are going to get together and they're gonna find the answer. I'm very confident in that because people do need an entry port. They do need that portal.
Yeah.
We as a state, we're working very hard on making it so that people don't have to come down to Manchester. They don't have to go to Nashua, where it's going to take a while because just like the rest of the country, we were caught off guard by this.
Yeah.
Nobody expected this. Now it's time we're building our capacity for treatment, and every day, every month, we're getting better at it.
Are we needing to do better about funding our approach to this? I mean, when all is said and done, these services require some funding, whether it's Serenity Place or, any of the others. Is there any chance that the state will come forward with some financial help for this crisis?
Well, the state has allocated money in the budget. The governor was successful lobbying to get the alcohol fund doubled. The Drug and Alcohol Governance Council and Addiction and Alcohol got that funding doubled. So there are more funds going out. But you had mentioned before the comments that President Trump had made. And I started talking about, if you look at the context of the situation that was going on, we were having national television shows come to Manchester. They're trying to get a grasp on what's happening. They're reporting out. So after that came out, the governor, what he did is he went to Washington, and he said, you've acknowledged we have a problem. Now let's talk about what are you going to do to help us with that problem? What funding is going to be happening? He actually brought a memo. It's saying that this is how much money we need, this is what we would spend it on, and this is what we've been successful on. And he talks about how we're small enough, and I agree with this. I used to talk about this. We're a small enough state that if we get enough funding, if we get enough programs going, we can have a pretty big impact pretty quick. We're not Ohio, we're not California. And also, there was talk about when that first wave of funding came, what had happened is they based the formula on what states are allocated. They based it basically on population.
Yeah.
So here we are being told we have this big problem, but there are states out there that were getting millions upon millions of dollars that proportionately they were not facing the same problems that we were facing.
Right.
So that's another thing that needs to be fixed when this next round of funding comes about. We're encouraged when the president had his press conference about declaring this an emergency. Now we're waiting to see what does that mean. What does that mean in funding?
Right.
I know there's legislation.
At this point, we just don't know, right?
We got to see what kind of legislation. I know that one thing that we can say about this in New Hampshire, that this is a bipartisan issue.
Oh, yeah.
We have our representatives, we have our senators, we have our Congress people. They are working in concert.
I do think it's gotten everybody's attention.
So we have We have a governor that couldn't be more motivated to do something about this problem. The legislature, the state legislature, and our federal representatives as well. So I think that's a good sign. How often do you see people working on something without an R or a D attached to it? This is a New Hampshire problem.
It certainly is.
And that is encouraging. You know, I've heard it mentioned many, many times that we can't arrest our way out of this. And in fact, it might have been you who said that first.
He certainly said it.
I'm not sure, but you have said it.
2013,
And,
we were talking about that.
but
yes.
the thing is, yet there is still an element of crime involved in this. And it's certainly, you can't take your eye off of that ball either, can you? Can you talk a little bit about that kind of briefly?
When we're talking about, for instance, I believe in every county, and we're on the verge of all counties, every county of the state, we have a drug court program. That
Yeah.
it's something that needs to be.
It was a bit of a struggle to get it going here, but we did.
But we have a drug court. Now, we're not saying that we're going to be, anytime somebody commits a crime and they say, hey, they have a drug problem, it shouldn't be, okay, I want to go to drug court. There's a screening process that goes through that. As a state, we're very big on enforcement when it comes to, enforcement's a big part of this problem, when it comes to getting the people that are dealing those drugs, getting the people that are committing violent crimes, that are a threat to the community. That's not what drug court's about. We're talking about people that determine if it, for lack of a better way of, if it wasn't for their drug addiction, they most likely wouldn't be committing crimes. So why not get them in treatment? Once you go to jail, once you go to prison, the chances of you, once you get out, relapsing is a lot greater than if you get treatment as soon as possible instead of entering the correctional. But believe me, as an law enforcement officer, there are people that belong in jail. There's some bad people that have done some bad things, and they need to pay the price, and they need to get out of society. And as a state, that's what we're doing.
Okay. We're being told it's time for our next and final break.
Show's moving along pretty quick.
Show's moving along pretty fast, folks. We'll have one more segment, and again, we urge you to consider joining the conversation with us at 640-3091. We'd love to have participation, and if you have questions or comments or suggestions, I'm sure Dave Mera in his current capacity would be delighted to hear those. And we will be right back. Well, hello, everybody. This is the third and therefore our last segment, as it is every Wednesday on the Progress Report. And if you haven't been watching us on the first two segments, we are very, very happy that we have with us former Manchester Police Chief Dave Mera, also served in that capacity in Portsmouth. Now is what is commonly called the drug czar, which I guess he doesn't take exception to. His official title is the Governor's Advisor on addiction and behavioral health. He's been in that capacity for about 6 months, so he has a statewide overview, but he has a strong Manchester connection. And we're talking about the greatest public health crisis we have in this state, and that's the misuse of opioids, heroin, fentanyl, and God, there's an even worse one now, isn't there? Carfentanil? I mean, that
Carfentanil, yes.
that is just really crazy. Totally deadly thing that you don't want to get anywhere near under any circumstances, even if you're a law enforcement officer looking to clean up the needle or something. So that's our subject for this program, and we've heard a bit about the reason why New Hampshire and Manchester are sort of in the bullseye of concern for this. We've heard a bit about the reasons why this got started and the reasons why so many people turn from prescription drug that were prescribed maybe for pain associated with medical care to get into the market for heroin and then into fentanyl and other things as well. So where I want to go next, Chief, and then I know Mike's got some things he wants to follow up on, is when we do programs on this, I keep asking our guests, and we've had Chris Hickey on, and we've had Dan Goonan on, and we've had Nick Willard on, who was your deputy, now our chief. When is this wave going to crest? Is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, last year, according to anybody can go on to the website of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. You just go on there and they can look at these stats. They come out. In a list of the overdoses, overdose deaths. So I apologize about that. So in 2016, we had 485 drug-related overdose deaths.
Which exceeded the number of deaths from traffic accidents in the state, right?
Off the top of my head, I have no problems agreeing with that. But this year, a projection was made by the medical examiner's office that number will be around 466 deaths. So if that holds true right around,
bad, but a little better.
It's very bad. But if you think about it, if you look at these stats, anybody can go onto that website and look at it, drug deaths by year. This will be the first time since 2012 that there's been a decrease in overdose deaths.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, that's something to look at. But I don't want people to get too excited about that because it doesn't necessarily mean overall overdoses are going down. It means that there's something else in play. And I believe a lot of this has to do with Narcan.
Right.
Narcan is working. Narcan saves lives.
More and more readily available. Is it available to families now?
It's available to the public. It's been handed out at community events. It's been state funded. It's carried, of course, by EMS, several police departments, first responders, and
Mm-hmm.
How much do you have to train to be able to administer this? I mean, can just anybody do this, or?
I went to one of the training courses. It was a couple hours. I went to it. They showed a video, and then they gave you. I did it in Derry. The Derry Fire Department was hosting it, and it was a statewide training. And then afterwards, after you took the training, then you were issued a nasal kit, Narcan kit. And I think Narcan is one of those things that is working, and that we really need to keep it up on as far as issuing it and getting as much as we can.
But that can restore your function so you can live, but it doesn't do anything for your addiction, right?
It doesn't do anything for your addiction, but we look at this. It doesn't. All that does is block the same receptors that opioids are getting at, and it stops opioids from getting to the receptor. But if you look at it, who doesn't know somebody that's suffered an overdose due to opioids? And then who doesn't know somebody or know of somebody who has died? When people say, okay, well, we gave this person Narcan, that's the second time. That's somebody's brother, sister, mother, father. It's somebody's relative. And if it was my relative, I would want them to get administered Narcan because everybody needs a chance. There's always that chance that person is going to get help. And the more help we make available. Yeah. And if you look at it, if somebody's having a heart attack because they didn't take care of themselves and EMS was responding to their house, they didn't take care of themselves, okay, now we're going to revive that person. We're not going to say, okay, it's a disease. We have to look at it.
We don't make the judgment.
I know it's easy for me to say that, but I'm in Manchester and across the state, we have first responders that are going over and over and over. They're seeing this. They're dealing with it. They're doing a great job. This city, I can tell you, Manchester should be very proud of their fire and police departments. We have
And
two.
we are.
It's incredible the work that they do. The officers and the firefighters and also the EMS, the AMR, they do a fantastic job. The numbers they're handling with this crisis, and plus they're going out and doing their regular duties, everything else. The police department has handled this crisis as well as any police department could have. And the fire department, we can't say enough about what they've done.
Yeah.
It shows that we have people that care.
You know, as effective as the availability of Narcan has been in decreasing deaths, I guess I have a comment and then a question. It's my understanding that people are noticing that, yes, you can be revived, but there's always the possibility of brain damage during the period of the overdose, and this isn't something to be taken lightly. This is a real life and death situation, and even though you may be revived, there's no guarantee that you're going to come back the same way that you went in.
That's true, and not it doesn't count as a life saved every time somebody is administered Narcan. There's actually an equation that the state EMS uses to determine
And
whether
that actually was my question: is that number changing?
that number is not it's not counted every time there is a Narcan administered. But if it wasn't for Narcan, our overdose rates would be extremely high. So that is success. This problem isn't ending anytime soon. We can't just focus on addiction. It's not just about opioids. There's still a big issue with alcohol. There's still a big issue with other drugs. Right now, we're seeing a pretty substantial increase in cocaine use.
I was going to mention that. I read in the paper just the other day that cocaine use is coming back, and I thought that had kind of gone away. These things come in waves, I guess.
And well, it's also it's the Mexicans. They're looking at it as a business. When can they make a profit? Crystal meth. Now, crystal meth, traditionally throughout the state, it was there would be some small labs that produced it for the most part, or there'd be some one pots where people were producing it for their own personal use. But what we're seeing is now it's being mass produced in Mexico, and it's being shipped up to all across the country and shipped up to New Hampshire. So now it's flooded. It's cheaper, and so that's something that we have to watch, and it's something that I want the public to know, because it's different than opioid addiction. I want people to be able to identify the signs. If they see a friend or loved one, try to intervene, and that's what I feel part of my job is, educating people that if the best thing we can do right now is really. And the most cost-effective thing is prevention. Stop the next generation. Do what we can to stop the next generation from becoming part of an addiction crisis.
Yeah.
And that is why we need to not only educate kids, but parents. Look for the signs. Don't be afraid to talk to your kids. Don't do it. It's not like one and done. Hey, I talked to my kid about drugs, like birds and bees. You know what I mean? You have to talk to them constantly. And talk to them, bring up the conversation, ask them what they're seeing, make it a conversation, and you do it consistently. And I believe that parents will have success. I've heard from many parents that have lost their kids. They had no idea. And good families. This isn't something that people are being raised wrong, and this is happening. There are more people, based on their environment, based on their upbringing, that are more susceptible to becoming addicted to something. And that's another thing that we have to watch for the signs of that. There are kids in school that might have, it's called ACEs, that have experienced a traumatic, been involved with a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to, in schools, community, need to be able to identify those kids and try to get them help now and deal with that issue now before they start trying to self-medicate. And another thing, we have not only a opioid crisis, but let's not forget mental health, behavioral health. There's a pretty good percentage of people that are suffering from addiction that have a dual diagnosis of mental illness. And we need to do a lot more in this state about mental illness. People need to understand you can't treat one without the other. They need those both things have to be treated at the same time.
Yeah. I remember a presentation we got up in Concord from, I guess, our our now retired chief of the corrections, Commissioner Wren, and about the percentage of people that are in his custody who suffer from a mental health problem or an addiction problem or both. It's like an overwhelming majority of the population has those problems in addition to the crimes for which they've been sent there. And
that is why there's effort being made, and we're slowly building on this. But getting people treatment, it's imperative that they get treatment while they're in correction facilities. But you can't just dump them off, just release them. They have to be passed off to the next step, recovery, because there are 3 points where people being treated for addiction that they're most vulnerable for relapse, to overdose.
Yeah.
Getting out of a correctional facility, getting treated in an emergency room for an overdose, and also getting out of treatment. If people get out of treatment, they might be successful for that phase, but if they're put back in that same environment, it's like it was a waste of time and effort and money.
The deck is stacked against them, right?
So
by
what
then.
we are doing as a
That's the
state,
recovery component.
the recovery is extremely important because treatment might take months, some people maybe many times years, but recovery is for the rest of their lives. It's something that they need to be able to participate in. And what we need to do is the whole continuum of care. Right now, we're identifying what the gaps in the system are from prevention to recovery, everything in between. There's a need for housing, respite housing, for people to be able to stay in a sober, clean living while they're waiting for treatment. And then when they get out of treatment, there are so many gaps that need to be filled. And again, there are good things that are going on. It's very promising with medicine-assisted treatment, which is using drugs
Like methadone?
methadone, Suboxone, and to be able to, that treatment along with administering those drugs, along with treatment, it's proved to be pretty successful.
Yeah.
And if we can, which we're trying to increase that within the state.
Yeah.
And another thing that we have problems in the state, that not only with capacity, but it's tough to get professionals here. There's a shortage. There's such a need, not only in New Hampshire, but Massachusetts. So to be able to get that workforce that we need, your LADACs, your counselors, you name it, doctors, nurse practitioners, there's an effort in the state going on to be able to recruit and retain people to be able to treat our citizens.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. It's gone by real fast. We could go a lot longer. But I just had to do one quick thing. There's a lot of, we're coming up with votes on legalizing marijuana in New Hampshire. We've already decriminalized it. But legalization is a step further. Do you think that marijuana is a gateway drug and is part of this problem, or do you not have that view?
In 10 words or less.
I don't like to call it a gateway, but studies have shown that marijuana being smoked in regularly for people from teens to their early 20s while the brain is being formed has an adverse effect, and it leads to addiction. It can also trigger mental health issues. That's a very short, not a very clinical answer, but I strongly believe that. And if you look at, I think before people want to vote on that, they have to look at what's happening in Colorado, what's happening in Washington State. Look what they're
We have examples that we can look to now. We're not shooting blind.
and is this really the right time to be telling our young people, hey, marijuana's legal?
Try a drug.
Why don't you get this legal drug? Why don't you get high? And is this really the right time when we're trying to deal with an epidemic?
Yeah.
I
Well, thank
think
you
it
for
sends
that.
the wrong message.
And thanks for coming down and joining us, Chief. We really
Much
appreciate it.
obliged. A lot of information.
I know we got to close because we're right up against it, and we have to be. I just want to say that next week we're going to have Bill Gardner on, our Secretary of State, who's had a recent controversial stint on the Trump Electoral Integrity Commission. And there was only one public meeting, was here in New Hampshire, and the commission was created by a tweet, and it's ending with a tweet. It ended with a tweet. And a lot of people wondering about Bill's participation in that. We'll have him next week, and you can participate in that discussion too. So thanks, everybody, and it's always a pleasure. Thanks again,
See
Chief.
you next week, folks.